Hello, friends. If this joke tickled your funny bone, don't forget to hit subscribe. It's an easy way to keep the humor flowing into your feed. Don't miss the last one. That is special joke for you.
A Chinese man rings his boss. "Me no work, I sick." Boss says, "When I'm sick, I make love with my wife." Try that. 2 hours later, the Chinese man rings back. "Me better. You got a nice house." A little kid gets on a city bus, sits right behind the driver, and starts talking loudly. "If my dad was a bull and my mom a cow, I'd be a little bull." The driver gets annoyed as the kids continue to yammer on. "If my dad was a rooster and my mom a hen, I would be a little chick." The kid goes on and on with all the animals he knows when finally the bus driver yells, "What if your dad was a bum and your mom was a drunk?" The kid smiles and says, "I'd be a bus driver." A husband and wife go to a restaurant. The waiter approaches the table to take their order. "I'll have your biggest, juiciest steak," says the husband. "But sir, what about the mad cow?" asks the waiter. "Oh," says the husband, "she'll order for herself." A man goes into a pet shop to buy a parrot. The shop owner points to 3 identical-looking parrots on a perch and says, "The parrot on the left costs $500. "Why does it cost so much?" asks the customer. "Well," the owner explains, "that parrot knows how to do legal research." The customer asks about the next parrot and is informed that it costs $1,000 because it can do everything the first parrot can do, plus it knows how to write a brief that will win any case. Naturally, the increasingly startled customer asks about the third parrot. $4,000, says the shop owner proudly. "Wow!" the customer exclaims. "What can he do?" "To be honest," the shop owner admits, "I've never seen him do a darn thing, but the other 2 call him senior partner." Little Johnny and Jenny are only 10 years old, but they just know that they are in love. One day they decide that they want to get married, so Johnny goes to Jenny's father to ask him for her hand. Johnny bravely walks up to him and says, "Mr. Smith, me and Jenny are in love, and I want to ask you for her hand in marriage." Thinking that this was the cutest thing, Mr. Smith replies, "Well, Johnny, you are only 10. Where will you 2 live?" Without even taking a moment to think about it, Johnny replies, "In Jenny's room. It's bigger than mine, and we can both fit there nicely." Still thinking this is just adorable, Mr. Smith says with a huge grin, "Okay, then how will you live? You're not old enough to get a job. You'll need to support Jenny." Again, Johnny instantly replies, "Our allowance. Jenny makes $5 a week, and I make $10 a week. That's about $60 a month, and that should do us just fine." By this time, Mr. Smith is a little shocked that Johnny has put so much thought into this. So, he thinks for a moment, trying to come up with something that Johnny won't have an answer to. After a second, Mr. Smith says, "Well, Johnny, it seems like you have got everything all figured out. I just have one more question for you. What will you do if the 2 of you should have little ones of your own?" Johnny just shrugs his shoulders and says, "Well, we've been lucky so far." A woman awakes during the night to find that her husband is not in bed. She puts on her robe and goes downstairs to look for him. She finds him sitting at the kitchen table with a hot cup of coffee. He appears to be in deep thought, just staring at the wall. She watches as he wipes a tear from his eye. "What's the matter, dear?" she whispers as she steps into the room. "Why are you down here at this time of night?" The husband looks up from his coffee. "Do you remember 20 years ago when we were dating and you were only 16? He asked solemnly. "Yes, I do," she replies. "Do you remember when your father caught us in the back seat of my car?" "Yes, I remember," says the wife. "Do you remember when he shoved the shotgun in my face and said, 'Either you marry my daughter or I will send you to jail for 20 years. "I remember that, too," she replies softly. The husband wipes another tear from his cheek. I'm a freeman now. An American soldier serving in World War II had just returned from several weeks of intense action on the German front lines. He had finally been granted R&R and was on a train bound for London. The train was very crowded, so the soldier walked the length of the train, looking for an empty seat. The only unoccupied seat was directly adjacent to a well-dressed middle-aged lady and was being used by her little dog. The war-weary soldier asked, "Please, ma'am, may I sit in that seat?" The Englishwoman looked down her nose at the soldier, sniffed, and said, "You Americans, you are such a rude class of people. Can't you see my little Fifi is using that seat?" The soldier walked away, determined to find a place to rest, but after another trip down to the end of the train, he found himself again facing the woman with the dog. Again he asked, "Please, lady, may I sit there? I'm very tired." The Englishwoman wrinkled her nose and snorted, "You Americans! Not only are you rude, you are also arrogant. Imagine." The soldier didn't say anything else. He leaned over, picked up the little dog, tossed it out the window of the train, and sat down in the empty seat. The woman shrieked and demanded that someone defend her and chastised the soldier. An English gentleman sitting across the aisle spoke up. "You know, sir, you Americans do seem to have a penchant for doing the wrong thing. You eat holding the fork in the wrong hand. You drive your autos on the wrong side of the road. And now, sir, you've thrown the wrong beach out of the window." 6 retired Irishmen were playing poker in O'Leary's apartment when Paddy Murphy loses $500 on a single hand, clutches his chest, and drops dead at the table. Showing respect for their fallen brother, the other 5 continue playing, standing up. Michael O'Connor looks around and asks, "Oh, me boys, someone got to tell Paddy's wife. Who will it be?" They draw straws. Paul Gallagher picks the short one. They tell him to be discreet, be gentle, and don't make a bad situation any worse. "Discreet? I'm the most discreet Irishman you'll ever meet. Discretion is my middle name. Leave it to me." Gallagher goes over to Murphy's house and knocks on the door. Mrs. Murphy answers and asks what he wants. Gallagher declares, "Your husband just lost $500 and is afraid to come home." "Tell the worthless SOB to drop dead," says Murphy's wife. "I'll go tell him," says Gallagher. Hoping to try another career where skillful hands would be beneficial, he decided to become a mechanic. He went to the local technical college, signed up for evening classes, attended diligently, and learned all he could. When the time of the practical exam approached, the gynecologist prepared carefully for weeks and completed the exam with tremendous skill. When the results came back, he was surprised to find that he had obtained a score of 150%. Fearing an error, he called the instructor, saying, "I don't want to appear ungrateful for such an outstanding result, but I wonder if there is an error in the grade." The instructor said, "During the exam, you took the engine apart perfectly, which was worth 50% of the total mark. You put the engine back together again perfectly, which is also worth 50% of the mark." After a pause, the instructor added, "I gave you an extra 50% because you did it all through the muffler, which I've never seen done in my entire career." A woman has to go to Italy for a conference, so her husband drives her to the airport. "Thank you, honey," she says. "What would you like me to bring back for you?" He laughs and says, "An Italian girl." When the conference is over, he meets her at the airport and asks, "So, honey, how was the trip?" "Very good," she replies. "And what happened to my present?" "Which present?" she asks. "The one I asked for, an Italian girl." "Oh, that," she says. "Well, I did what I could. Now we have to wait 9 months to see if it's a girl." The boss is finally old enough to retire from the company. On his last day of work, he ordered a farewell party for himself. The boss wanted everyone to express their good feeling about him by writing on the farewell card. so later he could remember how his staff missed him. Most people are writing standard phrases like, "Without you, the company will never be the same. We will always remember you," etc. Obviously, the boss was not satisfied. "I need something from the bottom of your heart, something really touching, you know." "Okay, John, you have been working with me for the last 20 years. You are my best staff. I am retiring now. What do you have to say?" Slowly but firmly, John wrote, "The best news in 20 years. Ed and his wife Norma faithfully go to the state fair every year, and every year Ed would plead, 'Norma, I'd like to ride in that helicopter.' Frugal Norma would always sternly reply, 'I know, Ed, but that helicopter ride is $50, and $50 is $50. After years of failed attempts, one year Ed and Norma went to the fair, and an exasperated Ed begged, "Norma, I'm 78 years old. If I don't ride that helicopter, I might never get another chance." To this, unflappable Norma, with hands on hips, replied, "Ed, that helicopter ride is $50, and $50 is $50. The pilot overheard the couple and said, "Folks, I'll make you a deal. I'll take the both of you for a ride. If you can stay quiet for the entire ride and don't say a word, I won't charge you a penny. But if you say one word, it's $50. Ed and Norma looked at one another with a nod of final agreement and a big smile on their faces as they went. The pilot did all kinds of fancy maneuvers, but not a word was heard. He did his daredevil tricks over and over again, but still not a word. When they landed, the pilot turned to Ed and said, "By golly, I did everything I could to get you to yell out, but you didn't. I'm impressed." Ed sheepishly replied, "Well, to tell you the truth, I almost said something when Norma fell out, but you know, $50 is $50. One day a friend asked, "Why aren't you married? Can't you find a woman who will be a good wife?" Fred replied, "Actually, I've found many women I wanted to marry, but when I bring them home to meet my parents, my mother doesn't like them." His friend thinks for a moment and says, "I've got the perfect solution. Just find a girl who's just like your mother." A few months later, they meet again, and his friend says, "Did you find the perfect girl? Did your mother like her?" With a frown on his face, Fred answers, "Yes, I found the perfect girl. She was just like my mother." "You were right. My mother liked her very much." The friend said, "Then what's the problem?" Fred replied, "My father doesn't like her." Patty and his two good friends were sitting at a bar, talking about their wives. "I think my wife is having an affair with the electrician," his first friend said, taking a swig of his beer. "How's that?" his other friend asked. "Well, the other day I came home and found wire cutters under our bed, and they weren't mine." The other men clapped him on his back and told him things would turn out fine. They ordered another round and kept drinking. After a while, the other friend said, "You know what? I think my wife is having an affair with the plumber." "Really, how's that?" the first friend asked. "Well, the other day I found a wrench under the bed, and it wasn't mine." "Man, that stinks," Patty and his friend said, and ordered another round of beer. After taking a sip, Patty said, "I think my wife is having an affair with a horse." Both his friends stared at him in utter disbelief. "No, I'm serious," Patty said. "The other day I came home and found a jockey under our bed." One day, a woman walked into a doctor's office, looking rather determined. She approached the doctor and said, "Doctor, I need you to help me with something very important." The doctor, always eager to assist his patients, replied, "Of course." "What seems to be the problem?" The woman leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I'd like you to make another hole down there." The doctor, taken aback, looked at her in surprise. He had heard many unusual requests in his career, but this one was quite unexpected. Trying to remain professional, he asked, Why on earth would you want that? The woman smiled confidently. Well, business is going really well, so I thought I'd open another shop. On their wedding night, the newlywed couple was finally alone together. The atmosphere was filled with a mix of nervous excitement and tender affection. As they sat together, the wife leaned in and kissed her husband for the very first time. It was a soft, sweet kiss, and it made the husband's heart flutter. He pulled back slightly, looked into her eyes, and said with a smile, "My love, that was incredible. Your kiss is so sweet that I don't think I've ever tasted anything so sweet in my life." The wife blushed at his compliment, and feeling a little shy but playful, she responded, "Oh, stop teasing me. You'll say anything to make me feel good." The husband, still smiling, insisted, "No, really, I mean it. If kisses were as sweet as yours, I'd never need to eat dessert again." The wife, trying to hold back a giggle, said, "Well, if that were true, our servant Bob would have died of diabetes by now." Two girls were catching up after a while, and they started talking about their recent experiences. The first friend said, "Ma, at first it was so much fun. I was really enjoying it. But then, when the jolts started, I was in pretty bad shape." The second friend looked at her, puzzled, and asked, "What are you talking about?" The first friend chuckled and replied, "Oh, silly, I'm talking about the train ride." A girl was chatting with her boyfriend and said, "Babe, last night I had a dream where someone was trying to kill me." Her boyfriend, trying to comfort her, replied, "Sweetheart, don't worry about it. Dreams aren't real. If they were, you'd be pregnant by now." One evening, Mr. Johnson decided to visit a friend at his house. As they were catching up, the weather suddenly took a turn for the worse. Heavy rain began pouring down, drenching everything outside in a matter of minutes. The friend, concerned about Mr. Johnson getting soaked on his way home, suggested, "Buddy, the rain is too heavy tonight. Why don't you stay over at my place? It's better than getting caught in this storm." Mr. Johnson thought about it for a moment, and then agreed. "Okay, that sounds like a good idea," he replied. The friend, eager to make his guest comfortable, quickly went to prepare a bed for Mr. Johnson. He made sure everything was just right, wanting to ensure that Mr. Johnson had a good night's rest. Once the bed was ready, the friend returned to the living room, only to find that Mr. Johnson was nowhere to be seen. Puzzled, he looked around, calling out, "Mr. Johnson, where did you go?" Minutes passed, and the friend began to worry. Just as he was about to head out into the rain to search for his friend, the front door creaked open. In walked Mr. Johnson, completely drenched from head to toe. Water dripped from his clothes, and his hair was plastered to his forehead. The friend rushed over, concerned. "Mr. Johnson, where have you been? You're soaking wet." Mr. Johnson, despite being soaked, had a calm expression on his face. With a slight smile, he gave a response that left his friend both amused and speechless. "I went home to tell my family that I'll be staying at a friend's place tonight because of the rain." One day, the teacher decided to challenge her students with a question she was certain would stump them. Feeling confident, she looked around the classroom for a likely candidate. Her eyes landed on little Johnny, who was known for his quick comebacks and mischievous nature. "Johnny," the teacher began with a smirk, "I'm going to ask you a question that I bet you won't be able to answer. Is football male or female?" Little Johnny didn't hesitate for even a second. "Female," he said with complete confidence. The teacher, surprised by how quickly he responded, raised an eyebrow and asked, "Oh, really? And why do you think that, Johnny?" With a grin spreading across his face, Johnny leaned back in his chair and replied, Well, miss, just think about it. Something that's always surrounded by a bunch of boys must definitely be female, right?" A carpenter went home after shutting down his workshop. A black, poisonous cobra entered his workshop. The cobra was hungry and hoped to find its supper lurking somewhere within. It slithered from one end to another and accidentally bumped into a double-edged metal axe and got very slightly injured. In anger and seeking revenge, the snake bit the axe with full force. What could a bite do to a metallic axe? Instead, the cobra's mouth started bleeding. Out of fury and arrogance, the cobra tried its best to strangle and kill the object that was causing it pain by wrapping itself very tightly around the blades. The next day, when the carpenter opened the workshop, he found a seriously cut, dead cobra wrapped around the axe blades. The cobra died not because of someone else's fault, but faced these consequences merely because of its own anger and wrath. Sometimes, when angry, we try to cause harm to ourselves, but as time passes, we realize that we have caused more harm to ourselves. For a happy life, it's best we learn to ignore and overlook some things. People, incidents, affairs, and matters. It is not necessary that we show a reaction to everything. Step back and ask yourself if the matter is really worth responding to or reacting to. Let's treat people with kindness even if they hurt you. People who show no inclination to change are best handled with silence and prayer. This story can help us make some good decisions. A woman was at her hairdresser's, getting her hair styled for a trip to Rome with her husband. She mentioned the trip to the hairdresser, who responded, "Rome? Why would anyone want to go there? It's crowded and dirty. You're crazy to go to Rome. So, how are you getting there?" "We're taking BA," was the reply. "We got a great rate." "BA?" exclaimed the hairdresser. "That's a terrible airline. Their planes are old. Their flight attendants are ugly. And they're always late. So where are you staying in Rome?" "We'll be at this exclusive little place over on Rome's Tiber River called Teste." "Don't go any further. I know that place. Everybody thinks it's going to be something special and exclusive, but it's really a dump." "We're going to go to see the Vatican and maybe get to see the Pope." "That's rich," laughed the hairdresser. "You and a million other people trying to see him. He'll look the size of an ant. Boy, good luck on this lousy trip of yours. You're going to need it." A month later, the woman again came in for a hairdo. The hairdresser asked her about her trip to Rome. "It was wonderful," explained the woman. "Not only were we on time in one of BA's brand new planes, but it was overbooked, and they bumped us up to first class. The food and wine were wonderful, and I had a handsome 28-year-old steward who waited on me hand and foot, and the hotel was great. They just finished a £5 million remodeling job, and now it's a jewel, the finest hotel in the city. They, too, were overbooked, so they apologized and gave us their owner's suite at no extra charge." "Well," muttered the hairdresser, "that's all well and good, but I bet you didn't get to see the Pope." Actually, we were quite lucky, because as we toured the Vatican, a Swiss guard tapped me on the shoulder and explained that the Pope likes to meet some of the visitors, and if I'd be so kind as to step into his private room and wait, the Pope would personally greet me. Sure enough, 5 minutes later, the Pope walked through the door and shook my hand. I kneeled down, and he spoke a few words to me. "Oh, really? What did he say?" "He said, 'Who the F—' A balding, white-haired man from Chabaco Lake in Florida walked into a jewelry store this past Friday evening with a beautiful, much younger gal at his side. He told the jeweler he was looking for a special ring for his girlfriend. The jeweler looked through his stock and brought out a $5,000 ring. The man said, 'No, I'd like to see something more special.' At that statement, the jeweler went to his special stock and brought another ring over. 'Here's a stunning ring at only $40,000, the jeweler said. The lady's eyes sparkled and her whole body trembled with excitement. The old man, seeing this, said, "We'll take it." The jeweler asked how payment would be made, and the man stated, "By check. I know you need to make sure my check is good, so I'll write it now, and you can call the bank Monday to verify the funds, and I'll pick it up Monday afternoon." On Monday morning, the jeweler angrily phoned the old man and said, "There's no money in that account." "I know," said the old man, "but let me tell you about my great weekend." They are seated, and after browsing the menu, they both decide to order the soup of the day. When the waiter brings their soup, the man knocks his spoon on the floor. "Whoops," he says and turns to the waiter. "I'm terribly sorry, but could I have another—" The waiter whips a fresh spoon out of his top pocket. "Here you are, sir," says the waiter, handing him the spoon. "Oh, thank you," says the man, a little surprised. The couple tuck into their soups, chit-chatting about the wonderful service and how delicious the soup is. The man glances around the restaurant and notices all the waiters have a spoon sticking out of their top pockets. Curious about the spoons, he beckons the waiter back over. "Is everything to your liking, sir?" asks the waiter. "Oh, yes, it's wonderful. Thank you. I was just curious as to why all the waiters are carrying a spoon in each of their top pockets." "Very observant, sir. Statistically, spoons are the most dropped utensil, so to save time, we all carry a spoon in our pockets." "That's very clever. Thank you." The waiter returns to the kitchen, and the man turns back to his soup. After a few more sips, he is looking around the room again and notices that all the waiters have a short piece of string hanging out of the fly on their trousers. He gestures again for the waiter, who returns to the table. "Anything I can do for you, sir?" "Just another question, if you don't mind," says the man with genuine curiosity. "I notice all the waiters have a piece of string hanging out of their fly. What is the reason behind that?" "Well, sir, to be perfectly honest, the string is tied to the penis, so when we go to the bathroom, one can just pull it out with the string and eliminate the need to wash one's hands, thus saving more time." "Interesting," says the man. A look of slight confusion crosses his face, and he adds, "But what about when you need to put it away?" "Well, sir," says the waiter, leaning in conspiratorially, "personally, I use the spoon." One day, an old man decided to leave work early. He hadn't been feeling well and thought heading home early might do him some good. Maybe he could even surprise his wife by spending some extra time together. As he walked toward his house, he pictured her reaction when he walked through the door earlier than usual. A mix of surprise and delight, he imagined. But when he stepped inside, his heart nearly stopped. There, in the bedroom, was his wife with his boss. His mind went blank, and without a second thought, he turned on his heels and sprinted out of the house. He didn't stop running until he was back at the office, panting and drenched in sweat. He burst through the doors, darted to his desk, and collapsed into his chair, trying to steady his racing heart. As he caught his breath, the absurdity of the situation began to sink in. He leaned back, wiped the sweat from his brow, and let out a nervous chuckle. "Phew, that was close," he muttered to himself. "If my boss had seen me leaving early, I would have definitely lost my job." A fierce argument broke out between a husband and wife one day, and the tension in the house was thick. The mother-in-law, who had been observing the situation, noticed a broken pot in the kitchen and couldn't help but ask, "How did this pot break?" The daughter-in-law, trying to keep her cool, replied, "Mother, we had a fight." The mother-in-law wasn't satisfied with that explanation and asked further, "But how does a fight lead to a broken pot?" Blushing slightly and hesitating, the daughter-in-law finally responded, "Well, mother, we made up afterward." The mother-in-law then noticed that even the bed in the bedroom seemed to have taken some damage, and asked, "And how did the bed break?" With an even deeper blush, the daughter-in-law shyly replied, "Mother, that happened when we reconciled." One day, an old man invited his fiancée for a walk in the nearby forest. The day was beautiful, with the sun shining through the trees and the birds singing melodiously. The old man, feeling a bit adventurous, thought it would be a nice change from their usual routine of spending time in the city. He turned to his fiancée and said, Let's go to the forest today. It'll be a nice break from our usual spots. His fiancée, who knew him well, looked at him skeptically and replied, "No, I'm not going. You'll try to take advantage of me out there." The old man, a bit taken aback by her response, quickly reassured her. "I swear I won't do anything like that. I just want us to enjoy the beauty of nature and spend some peaceful time together." She paused, thinking over his words, but she wasn't entirely convinced. After a moment, she looked at him with a smirk and said, "So, if you're not going to take advantage of me, what's the point of going?" "Forget it."
If you're still here, I'm thrilled you enjoyed the joke. Subscribing is a simple way to stay connected. Join our community and make me a happy friend.